The gunshot echoed across the plains, silencing the chirping crickets and sending a flock of startled birds into the evening sky as Sophia Jacobs clutched her bleeding arm and ran for her life, her heart hammering against her ribs and her unborn child a secret weight she'd carried for nearly 4 months now. Montana Territory, 1879. Sophia had come west with dreams of a new beginning, escaping a past that haunted her like a vengeful ghost. At 22, she had already weathered storms that would have broken most women. The daughter of a failed shopkeeper from Philadelphia, she had made her way west after her parents' deaths, answering an advertisement for a schoolteacher in the growing settlement of Pine Creek. The frontier town had seemed like salvation at first, a place where nobody knew her shame, where the shadow of that terrible night in Philadelphia couldn't follow. But now, as she stumbled through the twilight prairie, her calico dress torn and bloodied, she knew she'd merely traded one danger for another. Behind her, the distant sounds of horses and men's voices grew closer. Wade Thornton and his gang wouldn't give up easily. Not after what she'd witnessed at the saloon earlier that evening. "There she is!" a gruff voice called out, much closer than she'd expected. Sophia's heart lurched. Her legs burned with exhaustion, but terror drove her onward. The moon cast long shadows across the grassland, offering little shelter. Her hand instinctively went to her slightly swollen belly, protecting the innocent life within. A life that had resulted from violence back east. A life she'd resolved to love despite its origins. A life that would soon be extinguished along with her own if Wade caught her. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, she spotted a small homestead nestled in a hollow ahead, lamplight glowing warmly in its windows. With a surge of desperate hope, she changed direction and ran toward it. The cabin door flew open before she even reached it, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man silhouetted against the golden light. He held a Winchester rifle with the casual confidence of someone who knew how to use it. "Inside, quick!" he commanded, his voice deep but gentle. Sophia didn't hesitate. She stumbled past him into the cabin's warmth as he stepped outside, rifle raised. "That's far enough, gentlemen," his voice carried in the night air. "This is private property, and you're not welcome." Sophia collapsed into a chair, trembling with exhaustion and fear, listening to the confrontation outside. Through the small window, she could see Wade Thornton and his 3 companions, their horses dancing nervously. "This ain't your business, Quinn," Wade spat. "The woman's a thief and worse. She's seeking refuge in my home, so it is my business," the man replied evenly. "Now turn around and head back to town, or I promise you won't like what happens next." Something in his tone made the threat utterly believable. After a tense moment, Wade cursed, jerking his horse around. "This ain't over," he called back as they rode away. Only when the sounds of the horses faded did the man return inside, securing the door behind him. In the lamplight, Sophia could finally see him clearly, tall and weather-worn, with kind eyes that belied his rugged appearance. His dark hair was slightly too long, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a face that had clearly seen its share of hardship. "I'm Matthew Quinn," he said simply, setting his rifle in a rack by the door. "You're bleeding, Sophia." "Sophia Jacobs," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for not turning me away." His eyes flicked briefly to her belly, not obvious to most, but something in his gaze told her he'd noticed her condition. His expression revealed nothing as he moved to a shelf, retrieving bandages and a bottle. "Let me see your arm," he said, pulling a chair beside her. His hands were rough but gentle as he carefully rolled up her torn sleeve. "It's just a graze. Thornton's a poor shot, thankfully." She winced as he cleaned the wound with whiskey. "Why did you help me? You don't know me." Matthew worked in silence for a moment, his focus on bandaging her arm. Nobody running from Wade Thornton is all bad, he finally said. That man's the devil himself. He saw me leaving town. I witnessed him killing a man in the saloon. I was only there to deliver mending to Mrs. Rogers, who runs the place. Her voice trembled. He saw me watching through the window. Matthew nodded, his jaw tightening. That sounds like Wade. He's been terrorizing this county for years. He finished with her bandage. You're safe here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what's next. I can't stay, Sophia protested weakly. I've caused you enough trouble. His eyes met hers steadily. Madam, I don't know your story, but I do know Wade Thornton. He doesn't forgive and he doesn't forget. If you leave here alone, you won't make it to the next town. The truth of his words settled heavily in the room. Sophia felt tears welling in her eyes, months of fear and loneliness suddenly overwhelming her. I'm sorry, she whispered, trying to regain her composure. Don't be, he replied, rising to prepare tea at the small stove. Everyone needs help sometimes. As he busied himself with the kettle, Sophia took in the cabin's small but immaculately kept, with a few books stacked neatly on a hand-made shelf, a comfortable-looking bed in one corner, and various tools of a cattle rancher's trade organized along the walls. You live here alone? She asked, accepting the steaming cup he offered her. Just me and about 80 head of cattle, he confirmed. Been here 5 years now. They talked as night deepened around the cabin, cautious conversation that skirted personal details while establishing a fragile trust. Matthew explained he'd come west after the war, seeking peace away from the memories of battle. Sophia shared only that she'd been a schoolteacher in Pine Creek for nearly 6 months. She didn't mention Philadelphia. She didn't mention the baby, and he didn't ask. When exhaustion finally overtook her, Matthew insisted she take his bed while he slept on a bedroll near the door. Despite her protests, his tone brooked no argument. Get some rest, Miss Jacobs, he said, turning down the lamp. You're safe here. For the first time in months, Sophia believed those words might actually be true. Morning arrived with pale golden light filtering through the cabin's small windows. Sophia woke disoriented, the events of the previous night rushing back as she became aware of movement in the cabin. Matthew was already up, cooking something that smelled wonderful after her day of terror and hunger. Good morning, he said when he noticed her stirring. Hope you like flapjacks. She sat up, smoothing her tangled hair self-consciously. I haven't had flapjacks in ages. Well, they might not be as good as you remember, but they'll fill you up. He set a plate before her, the simple kindness nearly bringing tears to her eyes again. They ate in companionable silence until Matthew finally addressed what they'd both been avoiding. I've been thinking about your situation, he began carefully. Wade won't give up easily. He's got the sheriff in his pocket, so there's no justice to be had there. Sophia's appetite vanished. What can I do? You could leave the territory, he suggested, though his tone indicated he didn't think much of that option. But he's got connections throughout these parts. He'd likely find you. I can't keep running, she whispered, hand unconsciously moving to her abdomen. Matthew's eyes followed the movement, but he only nodded. There's another possibility, he said slowly. You could stay here. Her head snapped up. Stay here? With you? But it would give you protection, he continued. My name carries some weight in these parts. Most folk respect me, or at least they respect my rifle aim. Wade included, though he'd never admit it. People would talk, she said, her cheeks flushing. A woman living here with you, unmarried. Matthew rubbed his beard thoughtfully. That's true enough. He paused, weighing his next words carefully. Unless we weren't unmarried. Sophia stared at him, certain she'd misheard. Mr. Quinn, are you suggesting a marriage of convenience? He clarified quickly. Nothing more than that. You'd have a name, protection, and a safe place for. His eyes flicked briefly to her midsection. For as long as you need it. When things settle down, if you want to leave, I wouldn't stop you. She was speechless, studying the stranger who was offering to change his life to protect hers. Why would you do that for someone you don't even know? Something dark flickered across his face. Let's just say I understand what it means to need a second chance. Sophia considered her options, which were painfully few. Return to Pine Creek and face certain death. Try to flee the territory alone, pregnant and hunted. Or accept this unexpected offer from a man who, despite his kindness, remained a mystery to her. I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't need to decide now, he said, rising to clear their plates. But Wade won't wait forever. That afternoon, Matthew rode to his nearest neighbor's ranch, returning with news that Wade's men had been asking questions throughout the county. They were claiming Sophia had stolen money and jewelry, turning local opinion against her before she could seek help elsewhere. It's only a matter of time before they work up the courage to come here, Matthew warned as dusk approached. I have friends who would stand with me, but I can't ask them to fight a war on my behalf. Sophia stood at the window, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of orange and gold. In just one day, she'd come to appreciate the beauty of this isolated homestead so different from the cramped streets of Philadelphia or even the dusty lanes of Pine Creek. If I agreed to your proposal, she said carefully, what would you expect of me? Matthew looked surprised by the question. I'd expect you to be safe, he said simply. Beyond that, we'd figure it out as we go. This is a working ranch, there's always plenty to be done if you're willing. But I wouldn't demand anything you weren't comfortable giving. Sophia turned to face him fully. And the baby? It was the first time either had acknowledged her condition directly. Matthew didn't flinch. Children are a blessing, he said softly. Any child in my home would be treated as my own. Something in his tone made Sophia believe him completely. Still, she hesitated. There's something you should know, she began, her voice trembling slightly. The baby's father. He isn't someone I loved. In Philadelphia, I was. She couldn't finish, shame burning in her throat. Understanding dawned in Matthew's eyes, followed by a flash of anger that she instinctively knew wasn't directed at her. That doesn't change my offer, he said firmly. With those simple words, something broken inside Sophia began to heal. Then I accept, she said. Though I don't know how we'll manage a wedding out here. Matthew smiled, the expression transforming his solemn face. Leave that to me. True to his word, Matthew arranged everything with remarkable efficiency. 2 days later, Judge Hollister rode out from the next county, accompanied by Matthew's closest neighbors, the Andersons, who brought their 3 young children and enough food for a proper celebration. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, conducted in front of the cabin with the vast Montana sky as their cathedral. Sophia wore her cleanest dress, hastily mended, and Matthew had clearly taken extra care with his appearance. His usually unruly hair slicked back neatly. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Matthew surprised her by gently taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender and unexpected that it brought a flush to her cheeks. The small gathering shared a meal afterward, the Andersons treating them as a genuine love match rather than the arrangement it was. Their kindness made Sophia wonder if perhaps they, too, had begun under unusual circumstances in this harsh but beautiful land. As twilight approached, their guests departed, leaving the newly married couple standing awkwardly in their shared home. I'll sleep in the barn, Matthew said immediately, sensing her discomfort. You take the cabin. This is your home, Sophia protested. I can't put you out of your own bed indefinitely. Matthew shook his head. I've slept in worse places. Besides, I'll need to build an addition soon enough. Might as well get used to it. The following weeks established a cautious routine. Matthew taught Sophia the rhythms of ranch life, how to tend the vegetable garden, care for the chickens, and even basic skills with the gentle mare he kept for riding into town. For her part, Sophia brought order to the cabin's interior, creating a proper home where before there had been merely shelter. They learned each other's habits and preferences, negotiating the dance of two strangers sharing a life. Matthew was unfailingly respectful of her space and her past, never pressing for details she wasn't ready to share. In turn, Sophia came to recognize when his quiet moods signaled memories of the war that still haunted him. Word reached them that Wade Thornton had publicly vowed to deal with Matthew Quinn and reclaim the thieving woman he harbored. But the threat remained distant for now, a shadow at the edges of their growing companionship. As summer ripened into autumn, so too did Sophia's pregnancy become impossible to ignore. Her slender frame now carried an unmistakable roundness that both terrified and amazed her. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she felt the baby move for the first time, a definitive flutter that made her gasp aloud. "Are you all right?" Matthew asked immediately, concern evident in his voice. "Yes," she assured him, her hand pressed to her belly. "The baby just moved." Something wistful crossed Matthew's features. "That's good," he said. "Means he's strong." "Or she," Sophia corrected with a small smile. Matthew nodded, a matching smile tugging at his lips. "Or she." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when Sophia gathered her courage to ask a question that had been bothering her. "Doesn't it bother you, knowing the baby isn't yours?" Matthew considered her question carefully. "No," he finally said. "It's not the baby's fault how they came to be. And besides," he paused, seeming to search for the right words, "it feels right, somehow, taking care of you both." His simple honesty touched something deep within Sophia. Impulsively, she reached for his hand. "Would you like to feel?" she asked softly. Matthew hesitated, then nodded. Gently, she guided his calloused hand to the spot where the baby had been active. For several moments, nothing happened, and Sophia began to feel foolish. Then, as if on cue, there came a definite kick against his palm. Matthew's eyes widened with wonder. "Well, hello there, little one," he murmured. In that moment, something shifted between them, a connection forming that transcended their practical arrangement. Sophia found herself studying Matthew's profile in the fading light, noting the gentleness beneath his rugged exterior and the integrity evident in his every action. For his part, Matthew began including the little one in his plans and conversations, speaking of the coming spring and what they might plant for the baby to see grow. Late one October night, Sophia woke to the sound of horses approaching. Matthew was already up, rifle in hand, peering through the window. "It's Wade," he confirmed grimly. "Looks like he brought 4 men with him. Stay inside no matter what happens." Before she could protest, he slipped out the back door. Sophia moved to the window, her heart pounding as she watched the confrontation unfold in the yard illuminated by a nearly full moon. Wade dismounted, swaggering forward while his men spread out behind him. "Evening, Quinn. I've come for what's mine." "Nothing here belongs to you, Thornton," Matthew replied calmly, though Sophia could see the tension in his stance. "That woman you're harboring saw something she shouldn't have. Need to make sure she doesn't talk." "She's my wife now," Matthew said, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "And under my protection." Wade laughed derisively. "Wife? That's rich. You know what she is, Quinn? Damaged goods. That belly she's carrying ain't even your seed." Sophia's breath caught painfully in her chest. How could Wade know about her pregnancy? Then she realized Pine Creek was small. Someone must have noticed and gossiped before she fled. Matthew didn't flinch. "I'm only going to say this once, Thornton. Get off my land, or I'll put you in the ground. 5 against 1, Quinn. Bad odds." "I like my chances," Matthew replied, and something in his voice made 2 of Wade's men shift uncomfortably. The standoff stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then a new sound broke the silence, horses approaching fast from the east. Moments later, 3 riders appeared, rifles ready. "Evening, Matthew," called the lead rider, whom Sophia recognized as their neighbor, Eric Anderson. "Thought we'd pay a social call. Seems we have company." The balance of power had shifted dramatically. Wade's confidence faltered visibly as he reassessed the situation. "This isn't over, Quinn," he snarled, backing toward his horse. "Yes, it is," Matthew contradicted him. "You come near my family again, and it'll be the last thing you do." "That's not a threat, it's a promise." Something in Matthew's tone must have convinced Wade, because after a final venomous glare, he and his men mounted up and rode away. The danger passed, but its shadow lingered. Matthew began teaching Sophia how to shoot, insisting she know how to defend herself if necessary. They never mentioned Wade directly, but both knew he remained a threat that could return at any moment. As her pregnancy progressed, Sophia found herself opening up more about her past, her childhood in Philadelphia, her dreams of becoming a teacher, and eventually, the attack that had left her pregnant and fleeing east. Matthew listened without judgment, offering quiet support and occasional insights from his own troubled past. Their conversations deepened, no longer limited to the practical matters of running the ranch. They discovered shared interests in books and music, debated politics, and speculated about the future of the Montana Territory. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, their marriage of convenience was becoming something neither had anticipated, a genuine partnership built on mutual respect and growing affection. The first heavy snow of winter arrived in late November, blanketing the landscape in pristine white. Matthew had completed the cabin's new addition just in time, a proper bedroom for the baby, with a hand-carved cradle that he'd worked on secretly during evening hours. When he revealed it to Sophia, she was overcome with emotion. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "I don't know how to thank you. Your happiness is thanks enough," he replied, the simple sincerity of his words warming her more than the fire in the hearth. That night, as they sat close together reading by lamplight, Sophia made a decision. Setting aside her book, she turned to face Matthew directly. "I've been thinking," she began hesitantly. "The arrangement we made, you sleeping in the barn, me in the cabin, it doesn't make sense with winter coming. It's too cold out there." Matthew looked up from his book, his expression carefully neutral. "I'll be fine. I've insulated the loft well enough." "That's not what I meant," Sophia said, gathering her courage. "I meant, perhaps you should move back into the cabin. With me." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a question. "Sophia, are you sure? I never expected—" "I know you didn't," she interrupted gently. "That's one of the reasons I'm sure." That night changed everything between them. What began as a practical solution to Wade Thornton's threat blossomed into genuine love, expressed in both tender words and passionate embraces. Matthew treated Sophia with a reverence that healed old wounds, while she helped ease the lingering shadows of war that had haunted him for so long. As December arrived with its short days and long nights, they settled into a contentment neither had dared hope for. Matthew rode into town less frequently, unwilling to leave Sophia alone as her time grew nearer, but on one such necessary trip, he returned with troubling news. "Wade Thornton's been killed," he announced as he stamped snow from his boots at the door. Sophia looked up from her sewing in shock. "Killed? How?" "Shot in the back outside the saloon in Pine Creek," Matthew explained, hanging his coat. "Word is he'd been bragging about settling scores come spring. His eyes met hers meaningfully. Someone decided not to wait that long. Do they know who did it? Matthew shook his head. Sheriff's not looking too hard. Wade had enemies everywhere. He crossed to warm himself by the fire. I'm not sorry he's gone, but I don't like the manner of it. Shooting a man in the back isn't justice, it's just another crime. His principled response didn't surprise Sophia. It was part of what she'd come to love about him, his unwavering moral compass. Even when an easier path presented itself. At least we don't have to worry about him anymore, she said, returning to her sewing tiny gowns for the baby due in less than a month. Matthew nodded, though something troubled in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced their troubles had ended with Wade. His instincts proved correct when, 3 nights later, pounding at their door roused them from sleep. Matthew reached for his rifle before approaching cautiously. "Who's there?" "Sheriff Burke from Pine Creek," came the reply. "Open up, Quinn." Matthew exchanged a worried glance with Sophia before unbolting the door. Sheriff Burke stood on their porch, flanked by 2 deputies, all looking grim in the lamplight. "Evening, Sheriff," Matthew said evenly. "What brings you out in this weather?" "Got questions about Wade Thornton's murder," Burke replied, his eyes moving past Matthew to where Sophia stood in her nightgown and robe. "Seems you had more reason than most to want him dead." "I didn't kill him," Matthew stated firmly. "Mind if we come in and discuss it proper-like?" The question carried the weight of a command. The next hour passed in tense questioning, with Burke making thinly veiled accusations about Matthew's whereabouts on the day of the murder and his motives for wanting Wade dead. "I was here," Matthew insisted. "All day. Sophia can confirm it." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Sophia. "Mrs. Quinn, is that true? Was your husband here all day last Tuesday?" A chill ran through Sophia. Last Tuesday had been the day Matthew went to the Andersons to help with a broken wagon axle. He'd been gone from sunup until nearly dusk precisely when Wade had been killed. She didn't hesitate. "Yes, Sheriff. Matthew was here with me all day. We were preparing for the baby, moving furniture in the new room." Burke's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but before he could question her further, Sophia gasped, clutching her rounded belly as a sharp pain lanced through her. "Sophia!" Matthew was at her side instantly, concern evident in his voice. "The baby," she managed between clenched teeth. "I think it's coming." The sheriff and his deputies exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We'll continue this conversation later, Quinn," Burke said, already backing toward the door. "But don't go anywhere." After they departed, Matthew turned to Sophia anxiously. "Is it really time?" The pain had already subsided, and Sophia shook her head. "No, but it was the only way to get rid of them." Her expression grew serious. "Matthew, why did you lie about where you were?" "I didn't," he said, surprising her. "I was supposed to go to the Andersons, but Eric came here instead. We worked on the cradle together." His eyes searched hers. "The question is, why did you lie to protect me?" "Because I know you," she said simply. "You couldn't have shot a man in the back, no matter what he'd done." Matthew pulled her into a gentle embrace. "Thank you for believing in me." The real labor began 2 nights later, during a howling blizzard that made fetching the doctor from town impossible. Matthew sent up a prayer of thanks that Mrs. Anderson had insisted on teaching him the basics of childbirth just in case. Her frontier practicality now proving invaluable. For 12 grueling hours, Sophia fought to bring her child into the world, her strength and determination leaving Matthew in awe. When finally her cries were joined by the indignant wail of a newborn, tears streamed unashamedly down Matthew's face. "A girl," he announced, his voice thick with emotion as he placed the tiny, red-faced infant in Sophia's arms. "A perfect little girl." Exhausted but radiant, Sophia gazed down at her daughter. The baby had a dusting of dark hair and features that, thankfully, resembled her own rather than the man who'd forced himself upon her in Philadelphia. "She's beautiful," Sophia whispered, then looked up at Matthew with shining eyes. "Would you like to hold your daughter?" Matthew's breath caught at her choice of words. Carefully, reverently, he took the swaddled infant, cradling her as though she were made of the most delicate porcelain. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I've been waiting to meet you." As he held the newborn, Sophia saw his expression cloud briefly. "What is it?" Matthew hesitated, then voiced the fear that had clearly been troubling him. "When you look at her, does she remind you of what happened?" Sophia considered the question thoughtfully. "No," she finally said. "When I look at her, I see only hope and new beginnings." She reached for his hand. "She's ours, Matthew. Yours and mine. If you want her to be." Tears welled in Matthew's eyes again. "I want that more than anything," he said hoarsely. "But you should know I've fallen in love with her mother as well." Sophia's heart soared at the words she'd longed to hear. "And I with you," she confessed. "What began as convenience has become the greatest blessing of my life." They named the baby Grace Elizabeth Quinn, recording her birth in the family Bible that Matthew's mother had given him before he left for the war. The inscription listed Matthew Quinn as her father, making official what was already truth in their hearts. Spring arrived with renewed hope. Sheriff Burke eventually closed the investigation into Wade's death when a drifter confessed to the murder in a neighboring territory. The shadow that had hung over their new family finally lifted completely. As wildflowers began to dot the prairie surrounding their homestead, Matthew and Sophia stood on their porch, watching the sunset with baby Grace sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. "I never thought I could be this happy," Sophia admitted, leaning against her husband's solid strength. "After what happened in Philadelphia, I believed that part of my life was over forever." Matthew pressed a kiss to her temple. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known," he said. "You survived the worst and still managed to keep your heart open." "Because you showed me it was safe to do so," she replied, looking up at him with love shining in her eyes. "I was thinking," Matthew said after a moment, "that Grace might like a brother or sister someday, when you're ready." Sophia smiled, remembering how far they'd come from that terrified night when she'd first stumbled onto his homestead. "I'd like that very much," she agreed. "Our family has room to grow." Matthew's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Our family," he repeated, the simple phrase containing all the love and commitment she could ever want. "That's more than enough for me." As the last rays of sunlight gilded the horizon, Sophia knew with absolute certainty that the fear and shame that had driven her west had been transformed into something beautiful, a love as vast and enduring as the Montana sky above them, and a future limited only by what they dared to dream together.